Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/16 scale radio controlled Mato early production German Tiger I. The model that you see here is built for a private commission and belongs to a private collector. As I often mention in these videos, I often take on commission built projects from models ranging from 1/35 scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, this information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. Now, this model did receive several detail as well as mechanical upgrades and changes compared to the stock original offering. We'll be going over all of these modifications and accessories and changes in this video. Before we continue with the video, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around the model. And this model here is the ubiquitous early production German Tiger I. Basically, probably and arguably one of the most famous iterations of this tank design that has ever been put forth in not just model form, but also basically in pop culture. The design and history of this legendary vehicle go back to the late 1930s and early 1940s. At this time, the German Army High Command put forward the requirements to have a heavy tank that was technologically superior to anything else that was being developed at the time, as well as having the 88mm gun, along with very heavy and powerful armor that would make this vehicle almost impervious to any sort of anti-tank, as well as threat tank designs that were being fielded by the Allied armies. In addition to the heavy armor and the powerful main gun, the vehicle must also have the capability to ford through rivers as well as shallow bodies of water in order for it to get to the opposite side, as because of the sheer heavy weight of this vehicle, the bridges that would have been around were not necessarily going to be able to support the heavy weight of the final end product. By the early 1940s, two German heavy equipment companies put forth their prototypes for being tested and evaluated by the German High Command. The first firm was Porsche and the second was Henschel. After the competition, the Henschel design was deemed by the High Command to be the better of the designs and was the one that was greenlit to progress further into research and development and then finally into mass production. By early 1942, the vehicle's research and development had progressed and evolved to the point where the tanks were entering into full production. The first production vehicles are known as initial production Tigers. These had all of the basic characteristics which were greenlit by the German High Command. These vehicles went into combat and first saw action in Russia, as well as also several were sent to the North African campaign. Just like many new military equipment that makes its way to the troops for the first time, these vehicles had some shortcomings which were noticed by both crews in North Africa as well as on the Eastern Front. These reports made their way back to the designers at Henschel, who made some alterations to the Tiger I's design. These changes that came past this point here were added to the production lines, and these vehicles that came out during this time period are known as early production Tigers. Some of the changes that went into these vehicles namely feature that of the turret. The most important and noticeable feature has to do with the escape hatch. On the initial production Tigers, the vehicle would have had two pistol ports would have been mounted on either rear corners of the turret. One of the requests that made its way back to Henschel was that rather than having the second pistol port, to replace that with that of an escape hatch. Another change that was made to the turret was the provisions for storage of crew equipment. When the Tiger I was first designed, there were absolutely no provisions whatsoever to store equipment for the crew on the exterior portion of the vehicle. In field, the crews would develop some kind of solution for this, either repurposing Panzer III bustle bins and modifying them to fit onto the Tiger's turret, or they would cobble together their own sheet metal bins, like the infamous Tiger 100, which was captured in Leningrad. A similar practice was also done in North Africa. The Henschel engineers finalized the design of a sheet metal rear bustle bin, and this pattern would be used on all the Tiger ones that came from this point onward. And this is one of the features that gives the Tiger its distinctive look. Another smaller change that was added to the turret had to do with that of the mantlet. Where the gunner scope section is, more armor was built into the mantlet casting, thus giving the gunner a little bit more armor protection compared to the earlier offering. Another major change had to do with the tank's experience with the North African campaign. Due to the sandy battle conditions in that environment, the Maybach HL-210's air filters were not up to caliber to dealing with filtration of the air. The designers at Henschel went ahead and developed a system which would mount onto the rear portion of the deck, which would pre-screen the air prior to it entering into the engine compartment for it to be then picked up by the engine air filters. These large air filtration canisters utilize a cyclone system, which is very similar in concept to the cyclone air filters which are used on your Dyson vacuum to vacuum up your carpet. Even though this feature was primarily requested by crews in North Africa, the FIFO system became standard equipment and left the factory on all Tiger Ones, no matter which field that they were going to be deployed in. While on the hull, another bit of feedback and equipment that was developed by the engineers were that of the S-mines. From the crews in Russia, because of the type of battle conditions that were being encountered, the Soviets would swarm the German tanks with lots of infantry who would climb on top of the vehicle to either throw on Molotov cocktails onto the engine deck or would try to lob a hand grenade on the inside if someone left the hatch open. To deal with this problem, the S-mines were developed, and these were canisters which mounted anti-personnel mines which would be mounted along the perimeter of the vehicle. These charges were remotely detonated and would be used in case a swarming situation were to be encountered. Some more modifications that were developed had to do with that of the side skirts. The Tiger One, when it was first developed, they actually had no side skirts mounted on the vehicle whatsoever. Due to the amount of dust that was seen to be kicked up by this vehicle when running off-road, side skirts were developed and were finalized. Some units in North Africa did have side skirts present, however their designs actually differed from that of the standard early production side skirts that were later on developed. In addition to the skirts, matching rear and front mud flaps had their redesign conducted as well. Finally, the last bit of detail that was a change from the initial to the early production had to do with the track. When the Tiger One was first developed, the vehicle actually had a left and right hand specific track. This is obviously something that is less than ideal, specifically in terms of logistics and also just for production efficiency. This feature was quickly dropped and a single pattern track link was developed to be used on both left and right hand side. Some other minor changes that were also redesigned had to do with that of tow cable configuration, tool layouts, as well as also heat shields being developed for that of the two exhaust manifolds found on the rear sections of the tank. All of these features were standardized and finalized on the early production Tiger One and are definitely far different compared to the early initial production units. Automotive-wise, armor protection-wise, and armament-wise, the early production units were the same in specs compared to the initial production units. These vehicles did enter production and were produced in somewhat decent numbers, and more of these units were produced compared to the initial production run. However, as the war progressed, more feedback came from the front lines that requested some more changes, and these changes would primarily be to bump up the vehicle's horsepower, as well as to remove certain features in order to simplify production, speed up production time, and also use less raw materials. Now, even though there have been two other iterations of the Tiger One past this point, namely that of the mid and late production, the early production vehicle seems to be the one that is iconic for that of the Tiger One tank design. This dates back to the 1960s, in which many of the plastic model companies as well as the toy companies would study the Bovington Tiger I, which was captured in North Africa. This vehicle, being an early production Tiger, is where many of the old Tamiya kits, as well as the other plastic kits at the time, took their reference cues from. It is because of this that since the 1960s onward, the early production tank is the one that has been rendered the most in model scales, as well as also in plastic and metal toys. It wasn't until the late 1980s and into the 90s and into the 2000s to when the other renditions of the Tiger I started to be represented in smaller and larger scales. However, even though the other renditions of the Tiger I have gotten their fair share of the fame, to this date, however, still the undisputed heavyweight champion of the Tiger I family is still the early production unit. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get a good idea on the quality as well as the features that were found on the base starter model. And here's the model at the start of the project. For the base starter model, I'll be utilizing this 1/16 scale radio-controlled Tiger I kit from Mato. The Mato kit has a very interesting story. These kits date back to, I want to say, around 2011 or so. At that time, the Henlong 1/16 scale radio-run Tigers have been on the market for a little while and were very successful. A few years later, a company called Mato came around, and basically what they did was they took the ready-to-run Henlong model, made some tweaks to it, and released it under their own name. The Mato version, what's unique about them is that unlike the Henlong or the Taken, in which only a handful of components are made from metal, with the Mato, the entire tank is comprised of molded, casted, die-cast metal parts. Now, like I said before, the tooling is based off of the Henlong, and these models here do feature some of the same quirks that are found with the Henlong models. However, they are tweaked and altered compared to their Henlong configurations. It's also important to point out that many of the detail components that are on this model here are sold separately and can be found on online retailers as well as on places like eBay in order to upgrade the Henlong and Taken models themselves. When these models first came out, they were very interesting. I specifically remember the 1/16 world being taken off guard when they first showed up, as they were kind of showcased as really the affordable armor tech, if you will. They are 1/16 scale, they're a decent size, and being all metal kind of scratches that itch of wanting to have an all metal tank without having to go for the higher cost and budget required in order to go for something like an armor tech. These kits were pretty pricey, however. They were around, I want to say, $500 to $1,000 when they came out. Comparatively, the Henlong tanks were about $80, so quite a bit of a price difference at that time. Like I said before, these tanks here are fully radio controlled and came ready to run. They are powered by a 2.4 gigahertz radio, like we have here. And the model is made so that you have the main drive, turbo rotation, gun elevation, and this one here is currently fitted with that of a recoil and flash unit. These models do have a sound system. However, interestingly enough, they did not come with a smoke system, which was, I presume, still being worked on at that time, and I'm not sure if the smoke systems were something that were present on standard out-of-the-box Henlong, or even if Taken was even around during that time for that matter. Moving the equipment off the table, we could take a better look at the tank itself. Now, the model itself is extremely heavy. It does have a lot of weight to it, which will translate to having slightly better performance in that you do have a little bit more scale speed with the more mass that the model has to move, and it'll definitely also grip onto terrain a lot better compared to a lighter plastic tank like a Henlong. Just like all radio control tanks, it does feature a spring functional suspension. In addition to the suspension, the tires are nicely done in that they do have rubber tires, very similar to what's seen on Tamiya or even the Bandai tanks for that matter. Like I said before, all the components are made of die-cast metal. There's no plastic found on any of the features on this model here. The model replicates that of a early production German Tiger I, which is made clear for that of the FIFO system, which is found on the back. The molding quality of the details is pretty much standard, what you would expect. They're very similar to the Henlongs, but are a little bit different compared to the plastic offering. Unlike the Henlong, or even the Tegan for that matter, in which the tow cables are made from plastic, on this version of the Mato model, they are all made of real steel cables, which is a nice feature. Another nice feature is that of the bow headlights. You can see that unlike the Henlong, in which on the Henlong model there is a plastic headlight for the detail, and then on the face there's a unsightly LED that emerges. On this model here, that's not the case. They have the appropriate detailed headlights. This is also interesting to point out that these exact headlights, like I mentioned before, are some of the features as upgrade aftermarket parts that are sold on the aftermarket scene. Oddly enough, one bit of detailing that is missing is that of the little flanges which are found on the bottom portion here of the final drives. It's a simple feature add, and more likely I will be adding it to this build here. As for the way to get access to the inside of the model, this is where the Mato is different from the Henlong. The Henlong model, the upper and lower hulls are bolted together and are not designed to be readily removed. And to get access to the battery, you have an access hatch on the bottom portion of the hull to which you would remove and then get access to the battery. On the Mato, this was changed. The Mato is more like the Tegan, in which you have the upper and lower hulls, which are connected with a latch. You pull a latch and the upper and lower hulls disengage, thus allowing you access to the interior. Now, I believe these kits actually predate Tegan, as the Tegan tanks do this as well, only the Tegan tanks do it in a little different format. The Tegan models have a small little latch right under here, right above the track, in which you hit the latch, which then allows you to remove the upper and lower hull. The Mato, it's different. The Mato, the latch is actually hidden by the starter plate. To get access to the interior, you grab the starter plate and you pull it, and it releases the lug, which allows you to separate the upper and lower hulls. With the upper and lower hulls now separate, you can see the interior portion of the model. The electronics are mounted to this, what appears to be a Formica base plate, and you have two Velcro straps here for that of the 7.2 battery. In the front, we have here the gearbox. This model here features an all-metal and what looks to be steel gearbox, which is a nice feature and is absolutely required due to propel the added weight of a model this heavy with an all-metal running gear. The gearboxes definitely have to be very robust. And from the looks of it, seem to be designed quite well. As for the suspension, this is done via springs and is basically looks to be an improved version from what is offered of the Henlong. This differs from the Tegan tanks, which actually feature real torsion bars for that of the suspension use. Similar to the Tegan, this tank here does feature an adjustable rear idler wheel, and the system itself appears to be very similar in concept to the ones found on the Tamiya tanks, but is a much different design. As for the latch here, we can see the latch in the back and how it actuates the lug. Like I said before, the model does feature sound system as well as drive and main turret functions, but is absent of any type of smoke system. As for the quality of the smokestacks themselves, they are just like the Henlong or the Tegan units, which are hollow in the back, and more likely these will be replaced when I actually get to building this build. The FIFO system also appears to be a direct copy of the versions found on the Henlongs, with the way they are assembled and the type of detailing that is present on them. The speakers are these two little smaller units compared to the bigger ones which were found on the Tegan as well as the Henlong tanks themselves. This here is your on and off switch. There's this other hole present, but there's no other equipment found on it. I believe this more likely would have been for a sound volume knob, but that doesn't appear to be the case on this model here. In the middle here we have the main power card, I should say, that controls the whole tank. Now, what's unique about the Mato is that unlike Tegan or Henlong, in which you have this system here and has the radio system built in, on the Mato it's different. The Mato actually uses a separate RX for that of your radio control. It uses what looks to be standard like Futaba J type connectors and has your standard RX layout. Just like all RC tank models, the hull is connected to the upper hull functions with that of an umbilical cord, and it's your typical multi-pin type plug. And they are covered in what appears to be some kind of an electrical tape. The way you see the model, by the way, is exactly how it was dropped off by the customer, and no mods were made to this model yet by myself or by the customer for that matter. This is exactly stock. Moving our way to the upper hull of the model, like I said before, it's very reminiscent to that of the design of the Tegan. First, before I flip it over, the commander's cupola that is found on the model here is all metal, and like I said before, these are sold on the aftermarket scene to upgrade the other makers of 1/16 scale tanks. Getting on the inside, you can see that the hull is slightly different than that of the other versions. Right over here, you can see, to thin out the overall appearance of the grillwork, the company milled away some material of the upper hull. Here we have your turret turner, as well as the umbilical plug, and this is typical for these 1/16 scale models. We have here the lights, and what's cool about the Mato is that the front hatches are functional, which is a huge improvement over the older Henlongs. Tegans also do this as well. Now you can see the hatch wells are solid and do not enter into the vehicle. Another interesting feature is that of the air intake that's found on the back deck. This can pivot out of the way. However, it's interesting to point out, with just like the hatches, the component is cupped and solid. More than likely, I believe this was intended for use as a possible recharge jack, but the idea was probably never progressed any further, and so they just left it as is. This piece here has a little screw which mounts on the inside, and to get access you would be able to lift and rotate the unit out of the way. As for the turret functions, you can see that this model here features that of a servo, which uses for the recoil as well as the elevation. On the turret turner, this features here a 360-degree gear, as well as a slip ring to prevent the wires from getting all tangled. These are very nice features that are found on more of the recent versions from Tegan, and are sold as upgrades as well. One feature of the lower hull that I neglected to mention is that these tanks themselves were considered to be limited editions. And as you can see on the inside here, we have this little rubberized name plaque that has the name of the company, Mato Toys. And it has an actual serial number, and this tank here is serial number, if I can get it to frame, A0238. Now, in addition to having the serial numbered rubber plaque written on the side, on the bottom of the tank there was a plaque that is integrally molded into the casting. As for the rest of the bottom plate, you can see it's very similar to the Henlong, the way it has these angled portions found on either of the hull sides. More likely it's for rigidity, and unlike the Henlong, of course, there's no battery compartment type material that would have been molded into this section here. One final thing that I forgot to mention was the way these models were actually shipped. Unlike the other manufacturers, which have a basic retail type cardboard box, this Mato all-metal tank had this special box that I have here. The box is made with a much higher quality type cardboard compared to what you would find on something for like a retail type purpose. It has this type of silver inlay. And the box actually resembles that of a footlocker or some kind of a briefcase or suitcase of the period. The box features a little metal carry handle, as well as two functional latches which keep everything nice and locked in place during transport. Opening it up, the box has this nice velvet type appearance, and the tank just sits inside. And it does help the display of the model, specifically when opening up for the first time.